Let me start by sharing a few thoughts, a few facts about Mexico. Mexico is a country with 3,000 years of history. Mexico has a rich culture and very friendly people. With over 120 million inhabitants, Mexico has the 10th largest population in all the world. Our economy is the 15th largest in the globe and the 11th largest by purchasing power parity. It's big. It's more than 2/3 the size of Russia's. We export more manufactured goods than all Latin American countries combined, including Brazil, Argentina, Chile, more than all Latin America together. As an example, we're currently the leading exporter of TV screens worldwide. Mexico is the 9th most visited country in the world, with over 30 million tourists a year. Now, what does Mexico mean for the United States? Let me share some thoughts about 3 topics: trade, immigration, and finally the wall that Donald Trump plans to build. I'll start by trade. It has been said that NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement, has been a one-sided deal, with massive numbers of jobs and companies lost for the United States, and that Mexico has taken advantage of the U.S. because of massive trade deficits. But let me try to explain why I am absolutely convinced that that's not true. A few days ago, on February 13th, the 6 American ambassadors to Mexico from 1989 to 2015, from both Democratic and Republican administrations, published an article on the Washington Post about how the relationship with Mexico is strategic to U.S. interests. Regarding the North America Trade Agreement, they stated that the value of the two-way trade has grown 6-fold since the agreement entered into force in 1994, reaching $584 billion in 2015. They also explained that Mexico is now the 2nd largest market for U.S. exports, larger than the U.S. exports to China, Japan, and Germany combined. Now, what about jobs? It's an undeniable fact that some manufacturing jobs have been lost to Mexico. We all have read news regarding shifting production south of the border, but these stories paint just part of the picture, a very incomplete one, by the way. A much deeper analysis shows a completely different picture. Let's start by reviewing the behavior of jobs and Mexico-U.S. trade in recent history. This first line shows us how Mexican exports grew from 1994, when NAFTA began. The yellow line shows the behavior of manufacturing employment in the United States. Now, as you can clearly see, it remained steady despite NAFTA. It was in 2001 when manufacturing jobs in the United States start to drop dramatically, as you can see in the yellow line. And at the same time, Mexican exports also decreased a little. Why did this happen? Does it have anything to do with NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement? The answer is no. What happened in 2001 is that China became part of the World Trade Organization. Then came the 2008 recession, and the United States manufacturing employment takes another big hit. And American employment has been slowly recovering since then. Mexican exports also suffered a small decline in 2008 and then recovered. But as you'll see in the next graphic, this growth was mostly at the expense of Canada, not the United States. Here in the brown line, you can see how Canadian exports to the United States decreased as Mexican exports increased. The same effect seems to have happened with China and Japan. See how their lines cross between 2001 and 2002. So what the evidence shows is that manufacturing employment remained steady in the United States despite the North American Free Trade Agreement. Blaming free trade with Mexico for the loss of jobs in the United States might be an appealing political argument, but it is definitely not accurate at all. Now, about the massive trade deficit President Trump has been talking about. The question is it really a matter of advantages for Mexico built into our free trade agreement? Absolutely not. It turns out that the trade deficit with Mexico is not even the most important for the United States. It's actually not the biggest. U.S. trade deficit with China is more than 5 times the one with Mexico in total value. U.S. trade deficit with Japan is also bigger. U.S. trade deficit with Korea, Germany, France, and Russia is also bigger in terms of the percentage it represents of the total trade between each of these countries and the United States. So why blame NAFTA, and more specifically, why blame Mexico? Now, it is true that the United States lost 5 million factory jobs in 2 decades. But does that mean that United States production dropped? Not at all. In fact, U.S. production has been growing at a yearly rate of 2.2%. That's a lot. So what's going on? What the evidence shows is that manufacturing output is growing while manufacturing jobs are declining. The explanation is in automation, not in free trade. A Fortune article cited a report from Ball State University stating that trade accounted for only 13% of the lost U.S. factory jobs, but nearly 88% of the jobs were taken by robots and other factors at home. President Trump's approach against free trade can severely damage North America integration and competitiveness. I can assure you, it will not succeed in bringing back a past that's already gone. A past where manufacturing jobs were so important. Instead, we should be looking forward, understanding the changes to come, and working together to face the challenges they pose. The 6 American ambassadors to Mexico from 1989 to 2015 I have referred to also wrote this about NAFTA. This is not a perfect agreement, but neither is it the job killer some have construed. Since NAFTA was signed in 1993, U.S. jobs linked to trade with Mexico grew from 700,000 to 4.9 million. And they conclude, as I have explained, that new studies have made clear that the big causes of U.S. manufacturing job losses are automation and trade with China, not NAFTA. Second, I will now talk about immigration. It has been said that when Mexico sends its people, it is not sending the best. It's been said that we're sending people that have lots of problems, and that they're bringing those problems here, that they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. That's absolutely false. First of all, we're sending mostly tourists, and a lot of them. According to the United States Department of Commerce projections, Mexico became the top origin, #1 market of United States visitors in 2016, sending almost 20 million visitors. This figure is impressive. more than 1 out of 4 international visitors to the United States come from Mexico. That means a lot of jobs in the retail and tourist industries, depending on Mexican tourists. They spend close to $20 billion every year. Just to be clear about the importance of this, in 2014, the United States welcomed more visitors from Mexico than they did from the United Kingdom, Japan, Brazil, China, Germany, and France all together. Now, it is true. We have historically sent a lot of Mexican immigrants. There are 35 million Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the United States, which is the equivalent of the entire population of Canada. But keep in mind that 4 out of 5 are either American citizens or legal residents. Now, here are some important facts about immigration. This is relevant. More Mexicans left than came to the U.S. since 2009. Between 2009 and 2014, about 1 million Mexican immigrants and their U.S.-born children moved from the U.S. to Mexico. In the same period, 870,000 Mexican nationals left Mexico to come to the United States. More Mexicans left than came. And immigrants are not only hardworking people, but increasingly job generators. Immigrants continue to be nearly twice as likely as the native-born to become entrepreneurs, according to Kaufman's 2015 index. These numbers show a very different picture from that portrayed by some politicians and media outlets. Mexico is sending more tourists and less immigrants every year, but in any case, the immense majority of both groups are law-abiding Mexican citizens with meaningful contributions to the United States economy. Finally, let me share some thoughts about the wall. As a former president from Mexico said, obviously there's little the Mexican government can do to encourage more enlightened U.S. immigration policies. And it's none of Mexico's business if the U.S. government wants to add to its national debt by building a white elephant on its own territory. The United States government threatening to have Mexico pay for the wall is insulting and unacceptable. But above all, it's ridiculous. Just a few days after his inauguration ceremony, President Trump signed an executive order to build the wall. Several ways have been directly or indirectly suggested to have Mexico pay for the wall. The clearer proposal until now came from White House Press Secretary Spicer. He said Mexico would pay for the wall by imposing a 20% tax on goods imported to the United States from Mexico. At the end, the discussion seems senseless, since the border tax would be paid by the importer, and therefore the price of the imported good would rise, which means that ultimately it would be paid by the American consumer, not Mexico. Now, it has been said that a wall in the U.S.-Mexico border is badly needed to deter illegal immigration and to prevent crime and terrorism. Let's start by crime. During the debates on immigration, it's common to hear from studies linking crime and illegal immigration. The truth is that even opponents of any plan to legalize undocumented immigrants, such as Janice Kefart, researcher for the Center for Immigration Studies, acknowledge that there is no evidence that immigrants are either more or less likely to commit crimes than anyone else in the population. One noticeable and very interesting fact is that according to the American Immigration Council, from 1990 to 2013, the number of illegal immigrants rose. It actually tripled during that period. Did violence also rise? No. violent crime dropped by 48%. And what about terrorism? President Trump tweeted on his first week in office, "Big day planned on national security tomorrow. Among many other things, we will build the wall." It is true that America has a lot of enemies. Fortunately, Mexico has your back. No terrorist attack on United States soil has originated from someone crossing the Mexican border illegally. Mexico has worked and is willing to continue working with the United States to keep it safe. Despite historic mistrust and even confrontation, Mexico and the U.S. are now close allies. Both countries have been working very closely in safety and security over the last 2 decades. If you are someone known as hostile to the United States, it's almost impossible you will get a visa to enter Mexico. We think that the best way to keep America safe is not a wall, but a strong and reliable neighbor that shares values such as democracy and liberty. And very, very important, and not to be taken for granted, a neighbor with a clear majority having favorable attitudes towards American people and culture. I believe this is a good time to remember what Ronald Reagan said on June of 1987 during a memorable speech in West Berlin. "We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace." And then he addressed Gorbachev. "If you seek peace, if you seek prosperity, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate, open this gate, tear down this wall." A few days ago, almost 30 years after that speech, Berlin Mayor Michael Müller wrote in a public letter, "I call on the U.S. President to not go down this wrong track of isolation and exclusion." And referring to Reagan's famous speech, Mueller's statement concluded, "For that reason, I say, dear Mr. President, don't build this wall." Building a wall and killing free trade will not have the effect that President Trump seems to look after. Together, we have built more bridges than walls, and I believe that we have been on the right path for the last 2 decades. The bridges built by NAFTA have helped strengthen Mexico's economy, and by doing so, they also helped reduce illegal immigration. One last thought. You can say America first, and we can say Mexico first, and others could say Canada first or China first. Why not? As William Shakespeare said, "We came into the world like brother and brother, and now let's go hand in hand, not one before the other." Thank you very much.